Great, thank you, Joy. So I'm Maddie Grant, and I'm here with Jamie Nutter. And what I thought I would do is give a little bit of context as to who we are and why we're interested in this millennial topic. And then Jamie will present some of the research that we've done and conclusions from the books that we've written. So essentially, my background is in digital strategy and originally social media. And Jamie's is in organizational development, conflict resolution, and generational diversity. So those probably sound like quite different things, but what we realized in years of working together is that they're really our sort of backgrounds came together in a deep interest in the future of work and in changes that are happening in the business world. So starting with our first book, Humanize, we wrote the book because we realized that social media was shining a light on all kinds of different changes that were happening for companies and organizations dealing with social media, but they were actually shining a light on management and leadership issues. So things like having to be more decentralized, more open, more trustworthy, more authentic, more experimental. You know, these are all things that social media was kind of forcing organizations to be, but they're ultimately not about social media at all. They're about management. They're about a traditional system of management that's been in place for 100 years. But now the world is changing around us, and those traditional systems are maybe not working as well as they used to. So in Humanize, we spelled out, you know, what I just mentioned, those very specific ways in which traditional management structures were coming up against what we call a more human ecosystem and different way of working. So 3 years later, in 2015, we realized that the ideas that we've been talking about this whole time are actually really coming to the forefront because the millennial generation is now entering management positions. So the oldest millennials are in their early 30s. They're no longer kids these days. They're no longer the youngest, I mean, they're still the youngest entrants to the workforce, but they're also entering into middle management. As such, they can start to change things in ways that make much more sense to them. So When Millennials Take Over was our second book, which kind of took those ideas a step further and really sought to understand where millennials were coming from, you know, what the context is of the things that we can see visibly that they want to change, you know, why do they want to change them? And some of those things may be obvious. Again, digital and social media is an obvious one. But there are impacts and reasons behind those things that actually are very important for our future workplaces, not only for different generations to work better together, but ultimately in terms of trends in the way that work and the future of work is going kind of in general. And of course from that we started doing much deeper research and work with organizations who are focused on culture change and specifically on millennial impact and how to recruit and retain and engage and understand millennials in a way that means that we can all work better. So that is why we're here. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to share a little bit more about the specifics.
Cool, thank you. So as Maddie said, we ended up sort of focusing on millennials, which means we need to have a conversation about millennials, which means I gotta tell you, I've been in this conversation in this country about the millennial generation for 10 years, and we've been complaining nonstop about them. And one of the things that we come forward with is we really have to shift this conversation. Stop complaining that the millennials don't get it and that they wear too many flip-flops and they got too many trophies and all that kind of stuff, and really zero in on what shaped them. Because millennials are doing basically what every other generation has done. They grew up in a particular time period. It shaped their approach and their values. If we understand what's shaping them as a generation, then actually I think their behavior is going to make sort of a lot more sense to us. So I like to start with what are the big trends that have shaped this generation in a way that's really going to stick with them over their whole lives. So it'll actually be not just a life stage issue for them, but this will be a generational difference. So there's 4 trends. I'm going to go over them really quickly, and it's sort of some of these I think should not be a surprise, particularly the first one. Actually, the first trend shaping the millennial generation is the social internet. And again, I truly hope that you all were not surprised by that. The millennial generation grew up with the internet, and by growing up with the internet, that means they grew up with incredible power. Okay, you have to understand the social internet as a revolution in society took power from central institutions and it distributed it to the people. Right? The people can now use the internet to create things, to solve problems, to run businesses. I mean, this is a true statistic. There are more 11-year-old business owners in the millennial generation than any other generation before them. And I don't mean lemonade stands. I mean profit and loss business owners, because they had the power. They can use both access to all that information that the internet provides, but also using their networks to connect the right people to get things done. They solve problems, they do things. And this means, by the way, they're going to show up in the workplace and they are going to expect to be able to do more. Right? They're going to want to take action. They're going to want to move forward. They're going to want to not wait. They're going to, if you tell them they don't have the experience to do something, their response is, well, I can find somebody who has the experience and we can solve the problem together. This is what they grew up with, and so I think they're showing up in the workplace and expecting those kinds of opportunities to do things, get things done, and not wait. And I think a lot of organizations really struggle because we haven't built entry-level positions that let people do that. We haven't built systems and processes that enable that, and we found in our research that a lot of millennials are just kind of shaking their head and not understanding why we haven't been moving in that direction. So the social internet is number 1. The second trend shaping the millennial generation it doesn't get as much attention, in my opinion, is the fact that the millennial generation in this country grew up in a time period with really unparalleled material abundance. And I know we just came off a recession and it maybe doesn't feel as abundant as it used to, and certainly abundance is not evenly distributed in this country, but overall the numbers are staggering. I mean, we spend more money in this country on trash bags than 90 other countries spend on everything. Okay? There are more cars in this country than there are licensed drivers. Like if you line up all the people with the driver's license, there should be more than one car to choose from. And my favorite statistic actually comes from the self-storage industry. An industry, by the way, that did not exist in the Great Depression, right? Like back then, we didn't have the problem of having so much stuff we literally couldn't fit it into our houses, which are on average larger than they ever have been, by the way. But you know how much we spend? So like we can't fit our stuff into our houses, so we build these little stuff houses, right? And we put our stuff over there. We spend $24 billion a year on that. Okay, this is abundance. And when you combine that material abundance with sort of the abundance of the internet, like the abundance and access to information, you end up with a millennial generation that is expecting resources to be there. Right? They're showing up at work and they're expecting there to be budget to fix that problem. They're expecting, this may hurt you guys in organizations, they're expecting their technology to work. They're expecting their technology to be modern. They're expecting that you will invest in that. They're expecting that you will invest in upgrades. I mean, the number of, when we did our research for when millennials take over, the number of people that would ask us questions like, hey, can you tell us why in our organization they make us use this technology that really doesn't work? And again, from the older generation perspective, we're like, well, because we spent $1 million on that system 3 years ago, we can't upgrade. But that makes less sense when you have a generation that grew up with this kind of abundance. The other impact, by the way, on this is that millennials tend to be looking for higher order needs to be met in the workplace. Just having a job, which mattered a lot to baby boomers and Generation X, it still matters having a job to millennials, but they're expecting more. So what happens when you have your basic needs met, you start going to the higher order needs. So social internet abundance. The third trend that is, or force in society that has really been shaping the millennials is diversity. Okay, so the millennial generation grew up, it's sort of like when they grew up with unparalleled abundance, they also grew up with a level of visible diversity in society that we just had not seen in a pretty radical way in previous generations. I mean, we did not have views like this slide in our schools and in our city council meetings and in our shopping malls. The way we do now, we did not have that back when Gen X was growing up, or when the baby boomers are growing up. And to some extent, we've been sort of moving the needle a little bit on this, every generation, but it really skyrocketed with the millennial generation. They are coming to the organization, and they are expecting to see difference. If they don't see it, they just kind of shake their heads, and it really opens a window for them to not trust you. If you're not having diversity in the workplace, in the events you do, in your customer base, if it's not there, they're kind of puzzled about that. The other piece, though, around diversity that I think is really important is that it's not just around skin color and ethnicity and gender and those kinds of things. Those are obviously very important, but the millennial generation also expects one of the results of diversity, which is innovation. Right? What they expect people to be coming from different backgrounds with different expectations, different experiences, even people in different departments working together on things in ways that we don't typically do, because they know that when you bring that difference together, you get new and creative ideas. You get to do a mashup. You get to combine things that you don't think need to be combined, but when they combine them, it generates a new idea and something comes out. So they are expecting you to be experimenting and trying new things and maybe doing your staff meetings differently because one department has learned a different way to do it, and they come to organizations and they sort of get the pushback, and they're like, oh, well, that's that other department. They don't understand us. And so I find that it's really hard for organizations to embrace the kind of level of an innovation that millennials are expecting, and part of that, again, comes from the diversity thing. And then finally, the last trend, before we get into our poll, the last trend that is shaping the millennial generation is what I call the elevated status of children. And I put the image of trophies up there because this is the part of the conversation where people do tend to complain a lot about that we spoiled millennials, that we drove them everywhere, that we gave them trophies just for participating. And it's this general idea that they're sort of inappropriate and were raised wrong. Although I do find it interesting that the people who complain about that are the ones who actually raised them, but that's another story. But all of that conversation, frankly, is distracting. What really happened as the millennial generation was growing up is that we as a society took the status of children who are in a lower status position compared to adults, right? They have less power. We took that status and we elevated it. So for the millennial generation, when they were growing up as children, adults spoke directly to them. Adults talked to them on a first-name basis. Adults helped them solve problems. They negotiated with them. They actually treated them like little human beings, actually, which it turns out they are. So the millennials grew up with that, and it's sort of like a power, like they grew up with the social internet, but they expected basically to have access and influence now on people who have more power than them. Right, because that's what they had. Like the millennial generation, actually, when you do research on this, they identify their parents as friends at a much higher percentage than previous generations. Like in previous generations, you didn't call your parent your friend. I mean, you had a good relationship with them, but they weren't a friend. They weren't close to a peer. But the millennials are seeing it like that. So this does mean, I think, that they show up in organizations and they really want to have access and influence to people with more power than in the hierarchy, and that's a big challenge, I think, in a lot of organizations. They don't know how to let that happen. They still ask people to go through channels and follow the rules. And again, that just kind of doesn't make sense to this millennial generation. So those are the 4 trends. Again, I think when you understand the impact of the internet and abundance and diversity and this elevated status of children, you'll start to at least understand their behavior a little more. You still may not agree with it all the time, but at least you'll understand it, and at least it'll provide a basis for figuring out how to move forward. So remember these 4 things as we move into the next stage of the presentation, because they're going to connect to sort of how, as Maddie said earlier, the workplace is changing. But before we get in that, I think we're going to do a quick poll. And there is a link going in the chat window of your GoToWebinar control panel, I believe, and you can actually click on that link and take the poll. We'd like to know, of the 4 trends that I mentioned, internet, abundance, diversity, and elevated status, which one do you think is having the biggest impact on what's going on in your organization, in your workplace? And I, of course, cannot see any of these poll results, so I'm relying on Maddie to chime in once she starts to see some results coming in.
Yeah, so hopefully everybody can see the on the sidebar, there's a little section for chat. Please click on that link. It'll open up your own browser, and you'll be able to answer the poll.
And if not, we'll just make up some results and chat about it, I'm
No, we've
sure.
got some coming in, so looks like a few. And there's actually, thank you for those of you who are putting your answers in the questions box too. Looks like a couple of people are saying all of the above. So
Yes, well, I was trying to
yeah.
force a choice, but okay. We do see these repeatedly in organizations. This is not, I mean, we got, obviously, as part of our research, we got feedback that this is what people are seeing among this generation as they enter the workforce. This has been happening for a few years now.
All right, so we'll give it a couple more minutes because I see lots of responses coming in. But right now, the social internet is the highest one on 31%. And next is the elevated status of children on
Hmm.
28%. Third is abundance, raising the bar, that is 21%. And fourth is diversity. So let me refresh one more time and just see if that stays. Yes, that's just about staying at the same levels. Um, so the
So
top
social
two are
internet.
definitely social
Yeah,
internet and elevated status of children.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and both of those are about millennials showing up in the workplace and basically wanting to do more and move faster. Um, and I think that I would that makes sense to me, at least in my experience, that that's what a lot of organizations are struggling with because traditional management is not built for that. Traditional management expects you to pay your dues and come in as an entry level and do boring stuff. And I know, I mean, that makes sense because there's boring stuff to be done, but it's a little bit of a challenge for this generation. All right. So let me move on to the next piece of this conversation, which is really what Maddie made reference to before, which is a bit of a conversation around the future of business. You know, we wrote the book When Millennials Take Over, and I'll be honest, the title of the book is a bit of a trick because the millennials don't actually get to take over. I mean, in the sense that there's always at least three generations in the workplace. It's a team game, folks, right? So it's not like one's ever in charge. Um, but the millennial generation, what they're doing, what we found in our research, is that they're shining a light on where we're headed with some really big changes in leadership and management. And in fact, when we did research for the book, we obviously did research with millennials, which I've been doing for a long time now, but we did some additional research specifically for the book, some interviews with folks. But we also looked at organizations that were embracing what we are seeing as the future of work. We found some organizations as case studies that were doing some really, really amazing things, managing in some very different ways compared to traditional management, and also having really incredible results. So winning this one of our case studies won the best place to work award so many times they kicked them out of the program. Like they wanted some other people to win, so they gave them a special category. We have organizations who have such high engagement that people say things like, I can't imagine working anywhere else. Found organizations that are uh, charging more than their competitors and still having clients line up. So these are what we call positive deviants, organizations that are doing things in different ways and getting amazing results from them. And we wanted to see what is the overlap? Where is there consistency with the way these more futurist organizations are going with the millennial approach? And in doing that, we discovered and identified four key internal organizational capacities that we think are representing the future of business. These are capacities that these organizations had really figured out, really wrestled to the ground, and were able to implement in a clear way. And again, with successful results attached to it. And these are also capacities that are just going to make intuitive sense to millennials. And they are the largest generation in the history of the United States. They are going to be the largest segment of the workforce for decades to come. So we think this is kind of significant. So a quick review of the four capacities before we get to our last section where we talk a little bit about measuring this inside your organization. So the first one is digital. Again, I hope this was also not a surprise that we're in the digital age and we need digital organizations. But this one is just about technology. I mean, that's a piece of it. Like, you guys should be on the front, not leading edge, but at least the front half of the curve around digital technology adoption. But more importantly than that, it's about a digital mindset. It's about thinking like a software designer when you run your organization. Design your organization around the needs of the user. And that means customizing things, and that means constantly innovating so that the user is as able to innovate along with it. The case study in this case is a small nonprofit, actually, called the American Society for Surgery of the Hand. They designed their entire workspace so that however you want to work, you can. The desks raise and lower. There's tread desks in the corner. There's a collaborative space in one corner. There's a place called the Innovation Ranch, just designed to get creative ideas. You can work up on the roof if you want. There's a yoga room if you really want quiet. Like, they designed the space to meet the needs of the employees. They even put the CEO out in the middle with everybody. Not because they read that, oh, open office design is the new thing, because they asked their employees and they said, you know what, we get better work done and more work done when we have instant access to our senior managers. So that's what they did. It's designing the organization around the needs of the employees, not the organization. That's the digital mindset, focusing on the user and enabling the kind of customization and innovation that they see inside their organization on an everyday basis. So these are the kinds of things I think we need to really focus on digital. Yes, you need some technology, but more, you need to reverse who's at the center of the universe, and it's got to be that user, which can be your customer too, but also surprisingly your employees. So that's digital. Second capacity is clear. This one perhaps obviously is about transparency. But it's not just like blanket transparency, it's strategic. It's about making things visible in order to improve decision making inside the organization. So actually our case study for this one is a software company, and they literally put their project management system up on the wall. Now, there are only 50 people. They all work in one room together, actually work in pairs. And so each pair has all of their tasks literally taped to the wall using paper. You'd think they have a fancy software system for this, but they use paper and tape and yarn and colored dots, and they put all their tasks up there, and you put the dots on your tasks when you're either done with them or stuck on them or whatever their system is. And here's what happens. Every person in that organization, every single employee, from the newest employee to the CEO, you get to see exactly where all those people are in their projects. You know who's ahead and who's behind, and you make your own decisions about when to stop your work and when to go help somebody else. You don't need managers to do that. You don't need boring project status update meetings to do that. You don't even need email to do that. If they need to have a meeting with someone, they just have a conversation in front of everybody. They make everything visible, and it enables better decision making. This is huge in their culture. They've changed their hiring process to make sure that people are okay with this kind of system. They've built their whole culture around it, and it's based on, if you can make it visible, it will lead to better decisions down the road, even though you don't know exactly how. Like, that's the challenge. We don't know who needs to know in today's environment, so they opt for making things more visible, and they get better results. They're the organization, by the way, that charges more than their competitors and still has people lining up because their work is that good. Third capacity inside organizations is for the future of work is fluid, and this one is about hierarchy. We actually originally thought this chapter was going to be called flat, because we thought, oh, it's command and control is passe, we need to flatten hierarchies. Turns out hierarchies are actually pretty important. We need them in human systems. The problem with our organizational hierarchies is that they're too rigid. We design them and then they can't change at all. They can't flex and morph. And our case study for this organization, they have a traditional hierarchy. It's a healthcare company called QLI. They're in Omaha, Nebraska. They have a traditional hierarchy, but they understand in their system, because they do healthcare for people with brain injuries, they're like, our healthcare only works if we can connect it to like the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the patient. So the person who knows the most about that, wherever they are in the hierarchy, they have extra influence on the decision. And that because they find that they get better results. Like, that's what drives their success, is when they connect it to those things. So that will add to your status, even if you are the person that works overnight helping with cooking and cleaning. If you happen to know that patient better, you get to be more involved in the decision. That's a fluid hierarchy, and just for the record, that requires that you really know what drives your success, which is one of the things I think that organizations are a little behind on, which makes it harder to make a fluid hierarchy. So some of this stuff is hard work. So, but again, this is also the company that won the Best Place to Work award so many times that they kicked them out of the program. So they got some pretty good results as well. And then the last one is fast. All organizations, I think, in this day and age want to be faster and more agile. The case study, believe it or not, for this one is a bank called Happy State Bank in Texas. They give there's many measures of their speed, but the one that is most impressive to me is they give their loan decisions twice as fast as their competitors, yet they don't give any more bad loans, right? They're not exposing themselves to any more risk. And the way they get at that speed, this is going to annoy you maybe, is by giving up control. You can't really achieve, like they let their local loan officers they have a higher limit on those loans. And you think, well, how do they give up that control? Well, in order to give up the control to get the speed, you got to find something you can trust. You got to build into your system trust in something that enables you to give up control, which turns on the speed. In their case, actually, they trust in the power of personal relationships. Their entire culture is built around that, and they use the power of both internal relationships among staff, but also external ones among customers and in communities to allow, when those are built and those are strong, they can trust their decisions better, and that allows them to move faster. So really in organizations, when you're building a culture around this stuff, you have to hire for it. They only hire people who are good at building relationships. It really has to be woven into your culture. So that's a quick run through of the four capacities that we see as representing the future of the organization. So we're going to do another quick poll to find out, okay, if these are the future of business, which ones do you think you need the most work on? Which, and I'm forcing a choice here, and which we hit before, you can't say all of them. Of the four, which is the weakest right now in your organization? So again, there should be a poll to click on in the chat window.
Yes, so the poll link, as before, is in the chat window. If the poll is not working, it looked like it didn't work for just a couple people last time, please feel free to put your answers in the question box. I will see them. And we will wait a couple minutes for those to come through. So, yep, we got about half people have responded so far. I'll give it just one more minute.
I do
right
find
now,
I may be, yeah,
go ahead,
I was going to say maybe I'm giving it away, but or influencing the results. But I do find that these do get harder the lower you get on the list. So I'm curious to see if people have more trouble with fast and fluid compared to digital and clear. But we'll see.
Yes, well, funny you should say that, because let me do one more refresh. But that is, oh, actually, I was going to say that is how it's playing out, except that the top one is actually clear. So clear is on 30%. Next one is fast, which is on also 30. Oh, it's equal, 30% as well. Fluid is less, it's 24%, and digital is 14%. So in terms of the weakest, it did, until clear sort of moved up a little, it was in that kind of pyramid sort of shape where the weakest was fast, and going down from that basically.
Yeah.
The digital seems pretty good for most people.
Yeah, that's a good sign. I mean, like, really at this point, like, yay, thank you people for catching up a little bit on the digital. Like, that shouldn't be, but the transparency piece, I think, is really hard. I think that's one that is where traditional management, it's what makes people scared. They really are afraid of what's going to happen if they loosen the reins on transparency, and so I do see this a lot in organizations. That's something they struggle with. All right, so we got a few more minutes left. I want to close by talking a little bit about how you can sort of see this inside your organization. Fundamentally, digital, clear, fluid, and fast, if you are going to embrace these ideas, you will need to build them into your culture. Okay, that like there's kind of not of an option on that one. It has to be woven into your culture. You can't just sort of adopt a new policy or add one process and then declare that you're a digital or clear, particularly the fluid and fast pieces I mentioned earlier. They have to be woven in at a really deep level to say, you know what, this is what we value here. We value organizing around the needs of employees. We value trust. We value speed. We value these things, and we're going to build it into how we do our work so people have that experience. The only way, so if you need to get a culture that if you're thinking, all right, well, I got to work on fast or I got to work on clear, how do I make a culture that's more transparent? How do I build it in? You actually have to start measuring your culture as it really is. Because a lot of folks start with, oh, well, let's write up our value statements and say that we value transparency. That is lovely. That is nice. I kind of like that idea because I think transparency is important. But that does not do anything if your current culture is not anywhere near that. And you don't even know that. If you don't know what your culture is, you're not going to be able to create the culture you want. And so it's really important to do that first step of figuring out what your culture is. And so we do actually have a millennial alignment scan that we run with Question Pro. It's actually built into their product. That gives you that first cut, and I'm giving you a couple of sort of screenshots from some data we collected in one particular organization, and we asked questions around, like when we say digital and clear, this I got fluid and fast on the next screen, but digital and clear, it's not just are you digital, it's okay, are you really focused on the user? And that includes internal user focus on digital and also external user focus. But it also includes, as I said before, what are you doing on the digital technology side? How are you doing? And continuous improvement and innovation. Like those are the four elements inside digital. So we measure all of them in the questions that we ask in this tool. On a 0 to 10 scale, you can see you got to get above a 6 to at least be close to being aligned with the millennial generation. I love in this particular case, they're pretty good on the user focus, right? This is an organization that's like, yeah, we are focused on our employees in a pretty good way. We're focused on our customers. We're not bad on digital technology, but they're not good at change. They're not good at continuously improving things, and that was kind of the weak link for them. And so when they saw this data, they were able to say, we got to start actually, building our strength in terms of our internal capacity around continuous improvement and innovation as part of it. And actually, this is the data from the same organization, but if you look at also the FAST side of things, again, they're pretty good at having they're quite sort of aligned in terms of the millennial generation about a bias towards action. Like this is a culture where they'd rather do it and then see how it works than to sort of overanalyze it. That's cool. Not so bad on experimentation, trust, but change is the weak link, and it sort of goes back to the previous slide where the data was like, all right, we struggle with continuous innovation. This is where you start to put things together inside your culture to say, you know what, it's not just that we need to be fast or that we need to be digital. It's that, in fact, internally, we got some issues around change that we got to wrap our heads around and really figure out in order to shift things in a way where people will now say, you know what, my experience of this culture is a little different. And so this is an example. Again, these are the kinds of things you can find in the workforce tool in Question Pro, where you can actually run surveys with your employees and gather this data and use it to take action. And that's the only way you're going to move the needle in terms of creating an organization that really moves you towards the future of work. And I'll close, and Maddie, if you want to add anything at this point as well, let me know. But like, the piece around culture that I just want to reinforce, because I'm a culture guy, I love culture. Maddie and I have been working on culture for a long time, so obviously we're passionate about it and we talk about it. But I want to remind you all that it does matter to the millennial generation. Plenty of statistics on this one. When you ask them what's important, last one I saw, 77% of millennials said that culture is as or more important than pay and benefits when considering a job opportunity. Okay, that's the abundance piece that I mentioned earlier. They're looking for higher order needs. They care what your culture is, and they will leave if it doesn't make sense to them or it doesn't support where they want to head in their lives. And so if you want to attract this largest generation in the history of the United States,